The sun rose slowly over the gentle waves, its light bending and shimmering through the blue expanse of the ocean. In the heart of Bikini Bottom, the day began not with noise, but with rhythm, the slow pulse of water moving through coral valleys, and the faint hum of life awakening beneath the sea. The streets of the little town glowed faintly in the morning hue, their edges outlined by the soft gold that filtered down from the surface. The houses rested in stillness. The pineapple at the edge of town glistened faintly, its surface beaded with bubbles that drifted upward in lazy spirals. Inside, quiet movement stirred. The first ripples of the new day began, gentle, precise, as though even the water itself knew that something joyful was about to begin. The air carried the scent of salt and sea flowers, drifting lightly through the town. Small currents passed along the sandy streets, stirring grains into tiny swirling patterns that shimmered like liquid glass. From the windows of each home came the subtle signs of life, the flicker of a light, the soft hum of music, the faint motion of someone preparing for the day ahead. Beyond the edges of town, the landscape opened into rolling underwater meadows. Here, the seagrass bent and waved in slow rhythm, responding to the hidden tides that flowed unseen. This was Jellyfish Fields, a place alive with quiet beauty, where the light turned soft and golden and the world seemed to breathe in harmony with itself. In the distance, jellyfish drifted like suspended lanterns, their translucent bodies pulsing gently, catching the sun's glow in waves of pink, violet, and pale blue. The fields were endless, a living ocean of movement and color, peaceful and alive all at once. The gentle hum of their motion filled the water, a low, vibrating melody that carried far and softened every sound it touched. Near the entrance to the fields, a familiar figure moved across the sand, light, quick, almost dancing with excitement. The shape was unmistakable, square and bright, its colors sharp against the soft tones of the sea. Behind him trailed another, rounder and slower, leaving small circles in the sand where his feet touched. Together, they carried the rhythm of friendship, the easy, unspoken understanding that comes only from shared joy. Their goal was simple and perfect: jellyfishing. A tradition, a ritual, a celebration of the stillness and energy of Bikini Bottom itself. It was not the chase that mattered, but the experience, the calm of drifting among the glowing creatures, the connection to the gentle pulse of the underwater world. The seafloor shimmered as the two friends moved deeper into the fields. Bubbles rose from beneath their feet, trailing upward in long, spiraling threads that caught the sunlight and refracted it into tiny rainbows. The ocean seemed wider here, freer, a vast expanse of silence and song. Above them, schools of small fish passed in perfect formation, their movements so fluid it seemed choreographed. They darted through shafts of light like living ribbons, their scales flashing silver and blue. Farther out, a group of jellyfish pulsed in unison, their tendrils trailing like silk ribbons, brushing against coral outcroppings that glowed faintly in the morning light. The water was calm, and every sound felt softened by the vastness around it. The hum of the jellyfish, the distant rush of waves above, and the faint creak of coral shifting with the current all blended into a single, peaceful symphony. Time here did not move quickly. It flowed like the tide, constant, unhurried, infinite. As the figures reached the heart of the fields, the landscape opened into a wide clearing. The sand was smooth here, pale and soft, with patterns drawn across it by the slow movement of the water. Small clusters of coral rose like tiny trees, their branches covered in pastel-colored algae. A gentle current brushed through, carrying the shimmer of plankton in its wake. The jellyfish here were larger, their movements slower and more deliberate. They floated with a kind of grace that seemed older than the sea itself. Their bodies glowed with internal light, and as they passed through the open space, the water changed color around them, from blue to lavender, from lavender to gold. It was a sight that could quiet any thought, a moment of perfection suspended in motion. The two friends stood in its center, still and silent, their presence small and tender within the immensity of it all. The morning grew brighter, the sunlight reached deeper, and the fields began to hum with life. Tiny bubbles rose from the sand in clusters, drifting upward like miniature stars. The jellyfish moved in patterns that resembled constellations, their bodies creating shifting galaxies in the vast blue sky of the ocean floor. There was no need for speech here. The beauty of the fields required no description. The act of being present within them was enough. In that moment, the sea seemed to hold its breath, as though it, too, recognized the peace that existed in such simplicity. The two figures, standing side by side, watched the dance of the jellyfish unfold before them, their movements perfectly mirrored in still water. A gentle current passed through the clearing, carrying with it a ripple of light that brushed across their faces. It was cool and bright, a silent acknowledgement from the ocean itself. The morning had fully arrived now, and with it came the quiet promise of adventure. Not the loud kind of excitement, but the deep, calm exploration that begins when the world feels right, and the day has just begun. The jellyfish gathered closer, their glow intensifying as the current shifted. Their tendrils trailed through the water like threads of silk, each motion deliberate, each pulse carrying energy through the field. The two friends lifted their nets, not as tools of capture, but as instruments of play, moving them gently through the water in arcs that caught the drifting light. The scene was serene, timeless. Beneath the soft hum of the jellyfish and the slow turning of the tide, the ocean seemed to whisper its oldest secret. That joy, at its purest, was simply to be part of something greater than oneself. As the sun climbed higher above the waves, its light spread across the whole of Bikini Bottom. The coral glowed brighter, the sand shimmered like glass, and the soft music of the sea filled every corner of the water. And in Jellyfish Fields, where the light met the stillness, the day truly began. The light of morning spread slowly across Jellyfish Fields, each passing minute deepening the hues of coral and seagrass that stretched beyond sight. What began as pale gold had now become radiant, layers of pink, orange, and soft blue shifting together in the water like ribbons of silk. The whole landscape seemed to stir at once, every living thing awakening under the tender warmth of the sun above the waves. The meadows rolled onward like a living dream. The sand, touched by the faint currents of the ocean, glimmered as if dusted with powdered glass. Small bubbles, freed from unseen crevices, drifted lazily upward, catching fragments of sunlight as they rose. Their movement was delicate and hypnotic, a slow rhythm that mirrored the pulse of the sea itself. In the distance, the shapes of jellyfish began to multiply, first a few, then hundreds, then thousands. They appeared as if summoned by the dawn, gliding into view with the serenity of stars emerging in a night sky. Each one moved with its own pace, some quick and bright, others slow and luminescent. Together, they formed a ballet of light and motion, endless and silent. The two friends stood in the midst of it all, still as coral, their eyes wide at the vastness before them. They were surrounded by life in its purest form, a motion too peaceful to disturb, a sound too soft to be named. The hum of the jellyfish filled the water, blending with the subtle echo of waves above, the distant chatter of unseen creatures in coral homes, and the heartbeat of the sea that pulsed faintly through every grain of sand. They moved gently through the field, careful not to disturb the fragile rhythm of the place. The nets in their hands drifted loosely, not as instruments of capture but as companions, symbols of the connection they sought, the quiet balance between joy and reverence. The meadow deepened around them, the colors richer now, the shadows softer. Tall strands of seagrass swayed on all sides, bending and unfurling with the slow pulse of the tide. Between them darted tiny seahorses, their movements delicate and graceful. Occasionally, a bubble escaped from the sand below and spiraled past them, carrying a faint shimmer of light as it rose toward the surface. Every motion seemed deliberate, measured by the timeless patience of the ocean. Here, in Jellyfish Fields, there was no hurry. The world moved as it wished, and time followed. They passed through an archway of coral, bright and branching like a frozen firework. The coral surface was alive with texture. Small anemones stretching their tendrils, barnacles opening and closing in slow rhythm. The light filtered through its structure, painting the sand below with shifting patterns of rose and blue. Beyond the arch, the sea widened again into an open plain. The jellyfish here floated closer to the ground, their bodies glowing with deeper color. Some with centers of glowing gold, others tinted violet or cyan. The friends stepped among them with reverence, their movements quiet. Their laughter softened to a hum that melted into the sound of the water itself. A soft current passed through, carrying a ripple across the entire field. The jellyfish responded instinctively, moving together in a single wave, their pulses synchronized for a few perfect moments. The sight was breathtaking, as if the sea itself had taken a deep breath and exhaled light. The movement of the jellyfish stirred the sand below, revealing the faint glint of shells buried just beneath the surface. Small hermit crabs emerged briefly, their shells decorated with bits of coral and sea glass, before disappearing again into the soft sand. Life moved everywhere, unseen and gentle, bound together by the same rhythm. The air, or what passed for air beneath the sea, shimmered with a quiet energy. The two friends stood for a moment, completely still, allowing the hum of the field to envelop them. It was a sound beyond hearing, a vibration felt in the chest and the skin, as if the ocean was breathing through them. One of the jellyfish drifted closer. Its body was nearly transparent, its inner light pulsing faintly with every motion. Its tendrils brushed past gently, leaving a faint trail of glow in the water. The encounter lasted only a second, but it lingered in the air, like a note sustained too long to fade. The friends watched it drift away again, joining the others in their slow, spiraling dance. It was impossible to tell one from another now. Hundreds of luminous shapes moving through the blue expanse, each one part of the same endless flow. The current shifted again. A distant, low sound rolled through the water, not loud, but deep and resonant. It might have been the sound of waves far above, or perhaps the song of a whale passing at the edge of the horizon. Whatever it was, it carried with it a sense of vastness, a reminder of how small even this wonder was compared to the great ocean beyond. The jellyfish began to ascend slowly, drifting upward toward the brighter light near the surface. Their bodies caught the sun in flashes, sending ripples of color through the water. The two friends followed with their eyes, their faces illuminated by the glowing movement above. It felt like watching stars rise in reverse, light returning to the heavens rather than descending from them. For a long time, nothing moved except the tide. The silence of the moment was total, not empty, but whole. Every living thing within sight seemed to pause, as though the ocean had commanded stillness. The friends breathed in, their chests rising and falling with the gentle current, synchronized unconsciously with the pulse of the jellyfish above. Then, slowly, the world resumed its flow. The seagrass began to sway once more, the fish darted through the light, and the hum of the fields returned, deeper and softer now. The friends turned to continue their path through the meadow, moving toward the far edge where the water began to darken slightly, a place where new colors waited, and where the currents whispered of deeper stillness. As they walked, the sand beneath their feet left faint trails that soon dissolved in the soft water. The sea accepted their passing with grace, erasing every step, as though the moment existed only to be lived, not remembered. Above them, the jellyfish shimmered like constellations, their rhythm endless, their beauty unclaimed. The morning had fully awakened, and somewhere, in the quiet heart of the sea, the world smiled in its sleep. The sea changed character as the morning deepened. The light that once scattered softly now fell in thicker golden beams, bending through the water like strands of silk. The upper layers shimmered with gentle warmth, but below, the world grew deeper in color, a living tapestry of turquoise and amber, where every movement of the tide painted a new pattern upon the sand. Jellyfish Fields breathed in rhythm with the current. The jellyfish moved slowly, drifting along invisible pathways carved by the motion of the water. Each one pulsed with calm determination, glowing faintly as the sun above turned brighter. Together, they filled the open meadow like an ocean within the ocean, their translucent forms swaying like petals in an endless garden. The two friends continued through the field, their movements quiet and unhurried. The sound of the sea was soft here, not a roar or echo, but a low hum that resonated through everything: the sand, the coral, the very water itself. It was as though the world whispered beneath its breath, urging stillness, inviting peace. They reached a point where the ground began to slope gently downward. The sand gave way to smoother stone, patterned with veins of coral that glowed faintly under the shifting light. The descent was slow, like following a dream deeper into its own heart. As they walked, the water thickened with golden color. The sunlight above refracted and bent, creating waves of warmth that danced across the ocean floor. Tiny creatures stirred in the shallows, illuminated by the golden glow. Small shrimp darted between blades of seagrass. Clusters of plankton shimmered like dust in sunlight, rising and falling in invisible currents. Each flicker of life was brief yet perfect, part of a larger movement too vast to see. The friends moved through it all, their bodies leaving gentle trails in the suspended particles of sand. Every step created a faint swirl that dissolved almost instantly, erased by the motion of the current. Here, nothing held still long enough to be claimed. Everything flowed, changed, and returned. The hum of the jellyfish grew stronger as they descended further. The field above began to thin, replaced by smaller groups that moved slower, their colors deepening from pale blue to violet and soft rose. Their tendrils stretched long and fine, tracing the air with delicate precision. The light of their bodies reflected faintly in the stone below, creating an illusion of stars scattered across the ground. They reached the base of the slope, where the terrain flattened again. The light was softer now, filtered through the layers of jellyfish above. It glowed not from the sun, but from within, a radiant calmness that seemed to emanate from the sea itself. In this place, the current was steady, flowing from west to east like a slow breath drawn by the world. The friends stood within it, feeling the pull of its motion against their skin. It was neither strong nor weak, but balanced, a reminder that the sea's strength was in its patience, not its force. They moved with it, letting the current guide their steps. The water carried them gently across the meadow's lower basin, where coral grew thick and full. The coral here was pale gold, each branch covered with fine, swaying filaments that caught the light and released it in soft pulses. Small shells rested between the roots, smooth and unbroken, each one marked by the slow passing of years. The jellyfish glided between these coral structures as though they belonged to them. The movement was seamless, the rhythm unbroken. For every jellyfish that drifted upward, another descended, maintaining the delicate balance of motion that kept the water alive. The friends paused at a small rise in the coral, where a circular pool had formed, a perfect mirror of still water framed by gold and pink stone. Within it, the reflection of the jellyfish shimmered like a second sky. Their light rippled across the surface in soft, circular patterns that seemed almost to breathe. They leaned closer, their eyes tracing the shapes within the water. Beneath the reflection, tiny creatures moved: plankton, fish larvae, seeds of coral, the beginnings of life carried gently by the sea. Every motion echoed a truth, older than thought, that the sea never stopped creating, even in its stillness. A distant sound rolled through the water again, a low, resonant vibration that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The current trembled slightly in response. The jellyfish shifted their course, their rhythm altering subtly to align with the unseen pulse. It might have been the sound of the surface above, waves breaking against the sunlit world. Or it could have been something deeper, the heartbeat of the ocean, slow and eternal, calling through the currents. The friends stood in stillness, letting the sound wash through them. It wasn't loud, but it filled the body completely, leaving behind a quiet that felt alive. The sea, vast and ancient, had spoken not in words, but in vibration, in rhythm, in pure existence. As the sound faded, the current began to change direction slightly, circling instead of flowing straight. The water here was thick with motion now, moving in gentle spirals that carried particles of light with them. The jellyfish followed suit, turning slowly, their glowing bodies tracing luminous paths through the water. The friends found themselves in the center of the swirl, surrounded on all sides by movement and glow. It was not dizzying, but peaceful, a kind of calm that only comes from surrendering to flow. The water brushed against them like silk, the light danced across their faces, and the sea seemed to breathe with them. Above, the jellyfish continued their quiet ascent, drifting upward toward the sunlight. The golden beams met them halfway, filling the water with shimmer until it seemed that the whole field glowed from within. The current's motion began to ease again, returning to its steady pace. The friends moved onward, emerging from the circle of motion into another wide stretch of meadow. Here, the jellyfish were fewer, but larger, their forms older, their lights dimmer yet deeper. They pulsed with a slower rhythm, one that seemed to mark the passing of time itself. The friends watched them move with reverence, understanding somehow that they were in the presence of something ancient, not just creatures, but memories of the sea. They walked among them quietly, the world hushed around them. Every sound, every shimmer of light, every ripple of current seemed to speak of patience, of life measured not in days but in tides. And as they moved, the last of the golden light reached its peak, flooding the meadow in brilliance before softening once more. The water turned from gold to blue again, the transition smooth and seamless, like breath leaving the body. The friends stood in the stillness that followed, surrounded by drifting jellyfish and the soundless hum of the deep. They did not move, for movement was unnecessary. The world was already perfect in its calm, and above, the golden current continued its slow journey east, carrying with it the memory of morning. The descent through Jellyfish Fields led into a stillness unlike any before. The golden tones of morning had faded into soft blue and silver, painting the ocean in quiet shades of calm. Light filtered through in thin, shifting ribbons that touched the sand like the fingers of the sun reaching gently through a dream. The two friends walked in silence, their movements slow, their shapes drifting through the underwater light like fragments of a memory unfolding. The current that had carried them earlier was weaker here, almost motionless. The sea seemed to pause in this place, waiting. Ahead, the coral formed high ridges that curved inward, creating a vast bowl-like valley at the heart of the fields. The walls of coral shimmered faintly, their surfaces alive with movement. Small fish darted in and out of crevices, leaving trails of bubbles that rose and disappeared into the pale distance above. At the center of this valley was water unlike any other. It was perfectly still, a circle of calm, surrounded by motion, as if the ocean itself had decided to rest for a while. The surface reflected everything: the jellyfish above, the coral walls, even the faint outlines of the two figures who stood before it. It was a mirror, born not of glass, but of balance. They approached slowly. The sand grew finer underfoot, smooth and white, untouched by the chaos of waves. The reflection on the water's surface remained unbroken despite their presence. It felt sacred somehow, not because of what it was, but because of what it represented. The moment when the sea and the sky met perfectly and forgot which one was which. The jellyfish that drifted overhead pulsed softly, their light flickering across the still surface. Each pulse sent a ripple of color that spread outward, met its reflection, and dissolved. The effect was mesmerizing, as though the water were breathing light, inhaling and exhaling it in slow, endless rhythm. The two friends stood at the edge of the mirror and gazed downward. Beneath the reflection, the water was deep, impossibly deep. What appeared at first to be a flat pool revealed, upon closer look, a vertical descent into shadow. The light disappeared quickly below, swallowed by the unknown. It was beautiful and infinite, a glimpse into the ocean's quiet heart. Around the rim of the coral basin, the sea life moved with deliberate grace. Anemones swayed with faint pulses, their tendrils brushing the sand like slow brushstrokes of paint. Schools of fish passed through the upper water, their scales reflecting brief flashes of pink and gold. Every sound was hushed, absorbed by the stillness of the place. For a long while, the two friends simply watched. The world seemed to exist outside of time. The mirror reflected the sky above the sea, but here, deep below the surface, the light from that sky looked more like memory than illumination. Soft, distant, endlessly patient. The first jellyfish drifted downward into the reflection. Its motion was slow, reverent, almost ritualistic. The mirror accepted it without distortion. Its image joined perfectly with its form, and for a moment, it seemed as if the jellyfish had become part of both worlds, the real and the reflected, the above and the below. Then others followed. One by one, they descended through the light, their bodies glowing faintly in rhythm. Each one left a faint trail of luminescence that lingered for a heartbeat before dissolving into the calm. The water filled with color, violet, silver, faint blue, like an aurora born within the sea. The friends stood quietly and watched the slow procession. There was no sound beyond the soft hum that filled the water, a frequency so low it felt more than it was heard. It resonated through the coral, through the sand, through the still air itself. It was as though the ocean was remembering. The jellyfish gathered in the pool's center, their bodies drifting just above the darkness below. Together, they pulsed, in quiet unison. Their light illuminated the depths for only a moment at a time. But in those flashes, patterns could be seen. Faint outlines of coral spirals and stone ridges carved by time. It was the foundation of the sea itself, a structure older than thought. The reflection above shimmered again. This time, it did not mirror the world exactly. The image seemed to shift, bending the shapes of the coral walls and the light of the jellyfish into a vast circular design, a pattern that pulsed with the same rhythm as the creatures below. The friends stepped closer, drawn by the silent call of the water. Their reflections joined the pattern, merging and dissolving within it until the image became whole again. It was as though the sea accepted everything it saw, blending it into its single, endless vision. They could feel the hum of the mirror in their chests, a deep, low vibration that made the water around them tremble faintly. The jellyfish began to rise again, breaking the stillness with their motion. Each one ascended slowly, leaving behind trails of light that lingered like echoes. The reflection rippled once more, the image of the sea and sky dissolving into each other. The coral walls glowed faintly in response, their surfaces pulsing in time with the jellyfish. Small currents began to form, circling the pool in soft spirals. The water's motion was almost invisible but constant, a reminder that even stillness in the sea was never complete. As the last of the jellyfish left the pool, the reflection stilled again. The light faded to a faint shimmer, leaving behind the same perfect surface as before. It was as if nothing had happened, yet everything had changed. The two friends looked down once more, and saw themselves reflected clearly now, framed by the coral and the calm of the sea. Their shapes were small, almost insignificant, but they belonged here completely. Above them, the world continued to move. The current that had quieted now began to stir again. A gentle push that brushed through the coral basin. Tiny particles lifted from the sand and drifted upward, scattering light in soft swirls. The jellyfish spread out across the field once more, their rhythm returning to its endless cycle. The friends turned from the mirror and began to walk again, their footsteps silent in the sand. The reflection faded behind them, swallowed once more by distance and light. But its stillness lingered in them, not as memory, but as calm. The coral walls gave way to open meadow again. The sea grew brighter, the light of late morning now filtering down through the water. The colors shifted toward pale gold and blue once more, the familiar tones of Bikini Bottom's heart returning to the world. And though the current carried them onward, a trace of the mirror remained, a quiet understanding that somewhere, deep within the ocean, there was a place where time held its breath and remembered everything that had ever lived beneath the waves. The sea had reached its quietest moment. Somewhere above, the sun was high, spreading its warmth through miles of water until only the softest echo of its light reached the ocean floor. Down here, the glow was diffuse and endless, a golden haze that drifted across the landscape like a living breath. The edges of coral shimmered faintly beneath it, and every ripple of the current was gilded in light. The two friends walked through the open expanse of Jellyfish Fields, their forms small against the wide seascape. Around them, the world pulsed in subtle rhythms, the motion of the water, the sway of seagrass, the silent heartbeat of the creatures that floated above. Nothing hurried, and nothing stopped. It was balance in motion, a harmony so complete that it no longer needed to be understood. The jellyfish had spread far across the field now. Their numbers were countless, yet their movement remained serene and deliberate. Each one drifted according to the invisible pull of the tide, moving as though guided by thought, though no mind directed them. Together they formed patterns across the sea, wide spirals that expanded and contracted like the lungs of the ocean. The current brushed gently over the sand, carrying fine threads of sediment into the light. It moved around the coral ridges in soft arcs, whispering against the stone like wind through grass. Tiny shells turned slowly where they lay, catching the sunbeams that filtered down in long golden ribbons. The two friends waded through this light, their steps leaving faint swirls that lingered before dissolving into the sea's endless rhythm. It was impossible to tell where one motion ended and another began. The tide absorbed everything, smoothing every ripple until only peace remained. A group of jellyfish passed nearby, their tendrils floating like strands of silk. Their glow was faint now, a soft lavender hue that pulsed in slow waves. Each pulse illuminated the others, and together they formed a moving constellation beneath the sea. For a moment, the water seemed filled with stars, suspended between the sand and the surface above. The friends paused to watch. The light played across their faces and drifted through their reflections. Around them, the jellyfish continued their silent journey, rising and falling with the current. It was a slow procession, endless and circular, echoing the cycle of the tide itself. The seafloor began to change as they moved farther across the field. The sand deepened to a golden hue, and patches of smooth coral formed flat terraces that caught and held the sunlight. In some places, the coral had grown into patterns that looked deliberate, spirals and circles traced so evenly they seemed carved by an unseen hand. The water moved across them like breath over glass, leaving behind faint ripples that vanished almost instantly. Fish swam lazily between these coral forms, their bodies shining like moving coins in the light. They seemed unbothered by the presence of the two travelers. Instead, they passed in calm lines, part of the same tranquil current that connected everything here. As the friends continued, the sound of the sea shifted subtly. The hum that filled the water deepened, resonating through the coral beneath their feet. It was not sound in the way air carries sound, but vibration, a low, continuous tone that traveled through the bones of the sea itself. The world felt alive with it. Every few moments, the current would rise slightly, brushing through the meadows with more energy, then fall again into stillness. This pattern repeated over and over, a heartbeat too vast to belong to any creature. It was the tide, returning. The two friends stood still as it passed. The rise of water lifted the grass around them, made the jellyfish sway, and carried tiny shells in its motion. When it receded, everything settled again, perfectly in place, as though it had never been touched. Time dissolved in this rhythm. There was no way to measure the day, only the pulse of the tide and the quiet turning of the sea. The friends walked onward, guided not by direction, but by feeling, following the flow that seemed to carry them toward the deeper calm of the afternoon. They reached a ridge where the coral terraces dropped away into a shallow valley. From above, they could see the slow drift of thousands of jellyfish below. Their bodies glowed faintly beneath the soft haze of the water, and the light they cast moved like mist over the valley floor. It was an endless field of motion, a living cloud that pulsed in harmony with the sea. The two friends descended the ridge, their steps careful and unhurried. The water grew slightly cooler as they went down, touched by the deeper currents that wound beneath the fields. Each breath felt slower, heavier, filled with the scent of salt and life. The deeper they went, the quieter the world became, until only the hum of the ocean remained. At the base of the valley, the current gathered and turned. The jellyfish followed its movement, forming wide circles that drifted slowly around a center point, marked by a single column of coral. The coral was old, its surface smooth and pale, its ridges worn by centuries of tide. It rose like a monument in the middle of the sea, its top crowned by clusters of anemones that waved gently in the flow. The friends approached it. The water around the column shimmered faintly, catching the light of the jellyfish and bending it into rings. Each ring expanded outward in perfect symmetry, rippling through the surrounding water until it touched the farthest edge of the valley. It was as though the coral itself was breathing light into the ocean. The two friends stopped near its base and looked up through the water. The surface above seemed impossibly far away, a blur of gold and white. Between it and the seafloor drifted hundreds of jellyfish, their slow movement creating a curtain of glow. The whole valley seemed suspended between two skies, one of water, one of light. The coral column released another pulse of light, faint but steady. The water shimmered. The jellyfish responded in kind, their glow aligning with the rhythm of the coral. The pulse traveled outward, touching everything, every rock, every shell, every breath of current, until even the smallest grains of sand seemed to vibrate in harmony. The friends stood perfectly still, caught in the moment. It felt as though the ocean had become one vast organism, every part connected, every motion shared. The tide was no longer a force outside of them. It was within them, moving through every heartbeat, every thought. The rhythm slowed again. The water grew calm. The coral's light faded back into the natural glow of the sea, leaving only the faint shimmer of jellyfish drifting in the distance. The tide had completed its breath, the gentle rise and fall that had shaped every creature, every current, every life beneath the waves. When the friends began to walk again, they did so slowly, as though carried by the memory of the tide. The valley rose gently on the far side, leading them back toward the open meadows where light once more poured freely from above. The water was warmer there, the color brighter. It felt like afternoon now, though the ocean held no hours. The jellyfish spread wide again, their numbers thinning as they drifted toward the upper reaches of the field. Their movement remained steady, the same patient rhythm that had filled the morning and would continue long after day faded into night. As they reached the crest of the valley, the friends turned back for a final glance. Below, the coral column stood quietly, its surface now only faintly illuminated. Around it, the jellyfish continued their endless motion, circling gently in the slow, eternal dance of the sea. The tide would return again, as it always did. The current would rise, the light would pulse, and the water would breathe. The cycle would continue, unbroken and unhurried. The friends turned and walked onward into the golden haze. The sea stretched endlessly before them, calm and infinite. Every sound, every shimmer, every heartbeat of the water spoke the same truth, that peace was not found in stillness alone, but in the soft motion of things that never needed to rush. And so, carried by the rhythm of the gentle tide, they moved onward, deeper into the living calm of Jellyfish Fields. The afternoon light stretched through the water like liquid silk, descending from the surface in long golden strands that reached all the way to the seabed. The sea had entered that quiet hour between fullness and fading, when everything seemed to float a little slower, breathe a little deeper. It was a time the ocean reserved for reflection, a pause between the bright energy of morning and the descending hush of evening. The friends moved through the calm as though drifting in a dream. Their surroundings shimmered softly. Every motion left behind a faint wake of golden dust that swirled before dissolving into stillness. Above them, the jellyfish rose toward the light, their bodies catching the sun's fading warmth and turning it into a soft, glowing haze. It looked as though the sea itself was lifting, ascending gently toward the sky. The current had slowed nearly to nothing. Only the faintest motion passed through the water, a lazy rhythm, as though the ocean was half asleep. The jellyfish seemed to move without effort, carried by the invisible hands of the tide. They gathered in small clusters, floating just beneath the surface where the sunlight touched them most clearly. Their translucent forms glowed like fragile lanterns, casting long trails of shimmer through the still blue. The seabed below them had changed again. The coral grew thinner here, replaced by wide meadows of swaying seagrass that rippled with each subtle movement of the tide. The grass caught the golden light and reflected it in waves, creating the illusion of wind passing through fields above the world. Every blade bent and straightened in unison, as though bowing to the rhythm of the water. The friends waded slowly through this meadow, their forms merging with the motion of the grass. Around them, small bubbles drifted upward from the sand, catching the sunlight as they ascended. Each one reflected a miniature image of the world. The coral ridges, the jellyfish above, the glimmer of the surface far away. The bubbles rose until they burst silently against the light, their reflections dissolving into the sea. For a while, the two simply wandered through the meadows, following the gentle slopes and curves of the landscape. The water grew clearer here, the color softening into pale turquoise. It was as though the sea had thinned, becoming more air than water. Everything appeared lighter, freer, untethered by the weight of the depths. The jellyfish followed overhead, moving in a slow, circular pattern that covered the whole field. Their light turned the upper water into a ceiling of soft glow, and the seagrass below shimmered with its reflection. It was as if two worlds, the surface and the deep, had met in this single floating space. As they continued walking, they came across patches where the seagrass gave way to smooth sand. The sand was pale and fine, like powdered glass. When they stepped upon it, small bursts of light flared up and faded, not true light, but the scattering of the sun through disturbed particles. Each step created a brief constellation beneath their feet, vanishing almost as soon as it appeared. Tiny shells were scattered across the sand, most of them untouched and unbroken. Some were shaped like spirals, others like stars or small cups. They gleamed faintly in the filtered sunlight, as though holding fragments of the day inside them. The friends stopped to watch as a slow current brushed over the shells, turning them gently until they rested once again in perfect stillness. High above, the jellyfish gathered tighter together, forming drifting clusters that looked like clouds suspended in the water. The light from their bodies dimmed and brightened in rhythm, their pulses aligning with the soft beat of the sea. The pattern was mesmerizing. Not chaos, not order, but something between, where both could exist in peace. The friends looked upward and saw how the light passed through the jellyfish, bending into soft rainbows before scattering through the seagrass below. It was like a sky alive with motion, each shimmer a silent echo of the water's heartbeat. In the distance, the meadows began to rise toward a broad ridge of coral. The coral was low and wide, its surface covered with smooth ripples that reflected the light like molten glass. They moved toward it slowly, drawn by the way it seemed to hum faintly with the pulse of the tide. When they reached it, they found shallow pools formed in the coral's surface, each one filled with perfectly still water. The pools were mirrors again, smaller than the one they had seen earlier, but no less clear. The reflections were sharper here, capturing every flicker of jellyfish light and every slow wave of grass below. The friends leaned closer, watching the world within the reflections. It was both the same and not. The same sea, the same creatures, yet arranged in patterns that did not exist outside the mirror. The light moved differently there, spiraling inward toward a center that the eye could not quite find. It was as if the sea was dreaming, imagining its own reflection. The hum of the water deepened slightly. A new current brushed past, rising from the depths and spreading through the meadow. The seagrass swayed harder for a moment, then settled. The jellyfish drifted higher, their bodies catching the last of the afternoon's warmth. The light around them began to soften, no longer gold, but a pale, silvery blue that signaled the coming of evening. Everything began to slow even more. The jellyfish pulsed less frequently now, their glow dimming between breaths. The grass barely moved, the bubbles ceased, and the coral pools grew still again. It was the ocean's moment of exhale, the turning point where day released itself to night. The friends sat upon the coral ridge, the sea all around them glowing with a quiet, fading light. Above, the jellyfish floated in silence, their soft bodies reflecting the dimming sun. The surface of the sea shimmered faintly far above, like a memory of the world beyond. As they watched, the light of the jellyfish began to synchronize with the dim light from the surface. The ocean became a single living pulse, light expanding, fading, expanding again. The rhythm was perfect, patient, infinite. Far below, the shadows deepened into blue and violet. The coral glowed faintly, and the sand reflected what little light remained. Every corner of the sea seemed to sigh with peace. In that hour, the ocean felt timeless. The tide, the current, the light, the motion, all of it was part of a single, endless breath. The friends did not move. There was no need to. The world had reached perfect balance, the kind of stillness that holds everything within it: movement, rest, sound, silence, without separation. The jellyfish began to drift toward the horizon of the field, their glow trailing softly behind them like the remnants of a dream. The water followed, flowing in long, smooth currents that carried the meadows into motion once again. The coral ridge beneath them vibrated faintly with the change, humming with the quiet life of the sea. The friends rose slowly and began to walk again. The meadow stretched before them, endless and calm. The light from above had turned completely silver now, the last golden traces of day fading away. As they moved forward, the reflection of the surface shimmered faintly, growing dimmer with distance. The seagrass bent gently in their wake, and the coral pools behind them stilled once more. And so, beneath the soft pulse of the floating meadow, surrounded by the slow breath of the tide, the two friends drifted deeper into the serenity of the sea, a world suspended between the last light of day and the first quiet of the ocean's night. Twilight began to settle over Jellyfish Fields. The sea, once glowing with the warmth of afternoon, now shifted toward cooler shades, soft blues melting into violet, and faint silver threading through the folds of the water. The light no longer came from above alone. It seemed to rise from within the sea itself, glowing softly from the jellyfish that drifted like stars newly awakened beneath an ocean sky. The friends moved through the deepening calm, The rhythm of the water had slowed again, as though the sea were taking longer breaths. Each pulse of the current stretched and softened, carrying with it a hush that settled across the fields. The jellyfish floated higher now, their tendrils brushing gently through the last lingering warmth of the day. The light they carried was quieter, too. Not bright, not fading, but constant, like a heartbeat at rest. Beneath them, the meadows of seagrass swayed in slow unison. The golden hue of earlier hours had dissolved, replaced by silver-green tones that shimmered faintly in the dim light. Small creatures moved between the blades, translucent shrimp, delicate snails, clusters of plankton that rose like slow clouds. Their motion was barely perceptible, but the sea noticed. The sea always noticed. In the distance, the sound of the reef began to emerge, a low, continuous hum, deep and resonant, rolling gently through the water. It wasn't a sound in the ordinary sense. It was more like a vibration felt in the chest, in the bones, in the stillness of the mind. It was the voice of the coral, ancient and patient, whispering through the ocean as night began to bloom. The friends followed the sound. The reef waited beyond the meadows, at the edge of the field where the seafloor rose and twisted into slow, curving walls of stone. The way there was long but effortless. The water carried them with steady grace, and time itself seemed to lose its hold, measured only by the soft rise and fall of the current. As they drew closer, the reef revealed itself through the fading light. It stretched across the horizon, vast and alive, its structure glowing faintly in colors the eye could barely name. Soft coral pink, pale turquoise, the faintest glimmer of pearl. Its surface was covered in movement. Small polyps opened and closed in rhythm with the water, releasing tiny motes of light that drifted upward before dissolving into the current. The reef was breathing, as it always had. Since the sea was young, the friends approached the coral wall. The texture of it was smooth in some places, rough in others, shaped by centuries of tides and storms. Streams of bubbles escaped from its crevices and floated toward the light above, like the sea's own thoughts rising to the surface. Every sound was softened here, every motion deliberate. Even the jellyfish seemed to slow their drifting, their bodies pulsing in quiet reverence. The hum of the reef grew stronger the closer they came. It was not a single note but many, layered, deep, and harmonious. It filled the water around them, blending with the quiet sounds of the field until everything became one vast symphony of stillness. The vibrations passed through coral, through sand, through their bodies, through the ocean itself. They paused before the largest section of the reef, where the coral curved inward to form a great hollow. The space was filled with faint light, the walls reflecting the glow of the jellyfish and the last threads of sunlight filtering from above. The air, or what passed for air in the sea, seemed thick with calm. It was a place untouched by time. They entered slowly, moving between tall pillars of coral that rose like trees in a silent forest. Each one hummed faintly, its tone slightly different from the others. Together, they formed a harmony that resonated through the hollow. Small fish slept within the branches, their bodies swaying gently in the current. The water here was warmer, as if held still by the reef's embrace. At the heart of the hollow was a pool, clear and still as glass. The surface shimmered faintly with the light of the jellyfish above. Beneath it, the coral grew in delicate spirals, its color deepening to soft violet and white. Every detail was sharp yet peaceful, like a dream the ocean refused to wake from. The friends approached the pool and looked into its depths. It reflected the jellyfish, drifting high above, their slow pulses mirrored in the water's calm. Each glow spread outward in circles until it touched the coral walls, where it dissolved into faint echoes of light. The pattern repeated endlessly, a rhythm as old as the sea. The hum of the reef continued beneath it all, patient, unbroken. It sounded like the heartbeat of the ocean itself, slow and eternal. In that rhythm lay the memory of every tide that had ever risen, every storm that had ever passed, every quiet dawn that had followed. The reef remembered everything, yet held no burden for it. It was content simply to exist, to breathe, to hum. Tiny particles drifted through the water, catching the silver light and falling gently like snow. They landed upon the coral, the sand, the surface of the pool, only to rise again when the current stirred. The movement was so slow it could almost be mistaken for stillness. But the sea never truly stopped. It only changed pace. As the last traces of daylight faded, the jellyfish above began to glow brighter, their bodies turning from pale blue to soft white. The sea was now entirely lit from within. The coral reflected the light, scattering it across the hollow until the walls shimmered as though woven from stars. The hum deepened again, lower and steadier, as the ocean prepared to rest. The friends stood quietly amid the glow. There was nothing to do here, no direction to follow, no task to complete, only to be, to exist within the sea's vast patience. The jellyfish began to drift downward, descending slowly toward the hollow. They gathered above the pool, their light merging into a single luminous cloud. The water beneath them rippled faintly, disturbed only by their passing. When the first of them reached the surface, it paused, its tendrils brushing the reflection before continuing downward. Then another followed, and another, until the pool shimmered with layers of translucent motion. The light grew denser, the hollow filled with it, glowing softly from every direction. The coral walls reflected the illumination until the whole space seemed to pulse in unison with the sea. The hum of the reef aligned with the jellyfish rhythm, each note blending seamlessly with the other. The result was not sound or light alone, but something beyond both, a vibration that felt like peace itself. The friends closed their eyes, letting the ocean's song move through them. The current brushed gently around them, carrying warmth and calm. Every part of the world seemed to breathe together. Coral, water, jellyfish, and light, all bound by the same slow pulse. When the light finally began to fade, it did so gradually, like the final exhale of a long, peaceful sigh. The jellyfish rose once more, their glow dimming as they drifted toward the upper sea. The hum softened, fading into the stillness of evening. The hollow returned to shadow, though it remained alive with quiet energy. The reef continued its endless whisper, low and eternal, echoing through the darkening water. The friends turned and left the hollow, stepping once again into the open field. The meadows stretched endlessly before them, bathed in faint blue light. The seagrass swayed in slow motion, and far above, the jellyfish formed constellations that moved across the twilight like drifting stars. The world was asleep now, yet wide awake in its dreaming. And as the friends walked beneath the whispering reef, carried by the ocean's calm breath, it felt as though the sea itself was watching over them, patient, vast, and endlessly kind. Night fell slowly over Jellyfish Fields, not as a sudden veil, but as a gentle layering of calm upon calm. The sea dimmed into stillness, its colors dissolving into gradients of soft blue and indigo. The last hints of daylight retreated beyond the coral ridges, leaving behind a world suspended in quiet luminescence. Above, the surface shimmered faintly under the reflection of the moon. The light filtered downward, broken into fragments by the water, scattering into 1,000 silver ripples that danced across the fields below. Every movement, every particle, seemed slower now, deliberate, softened by the hush of the deep. The jellyfish had risen higher, floating like constellations in the dark. Their glow pulsed rhythmically, slow as the sea's heartbeat. The faint shimmer of their light guided the current, marking invisible pathways through the vast meadow. Each pulse sent ripples through the water, faint vibrations that spread outward, fading into distance before beginning again. The meadows of seagrass bowed gently beneath the soft tide. Small bubbles escaped from the sand, rising lazily, catching the moonlight as they went. The fields were alive with this subtle motion, quiet, continuous, eternal. In the deepening night, the entire seascape seemed to exhale, as though the ocean itself had entered a long, serene dream. From the coral hollow where the reef whispered its endless song, the current began to shift. It was a slow turning at first, an unseen hand stirring the edges of still water. The movement spread gradually, widening as it flowed through the grass, winding between rock and coral, reaching the open fields where the friends drifted. The current carried warmth. It moved with patience, wrapping gently around the sea floor, lifting grains of sand that sparkled faintly like dust in starlight. It didn't rush or pull. It glided, graceful, unhurried, following the rhythm of the moon's slow pull above. It passed over the fields and up through the coral, brushing across the soft edges of the world. It stirred the sleeping plankton, causing faint, bioluminescent trails to shimmer in its wake. It bent the blades of seagrass in long, synchronized waves, a silent dance choreographed by the sea itself. Every motion created a pattern, concentric circles of energy that rose, merged, and dissolved, over and over again. There was no sound to it, only the sense of motion felt rather than heard. The friends moved within this vast rhythm, carried along by the gentle tide. The current wrapped around them like silk. It carried the scent of coral dust and distant salt, the quiet trace of the day now gone. The light of the jellyfish refracted through the moving water, creating soft streams of color that drifted across their path. Pink, blue, violet, white, each fading into the next. As they glided deeper into the field, the sea floor dipped into a shallow basin, a valley carved by time and tide. The basin glowed faintly from the light of countless jellyfish floating above it, their forms mirrored in the water below. The surface shimmered like liquid glass, every reflection layered upon another, until it was impossible to tell where the real sea ended and the reflected one began. The night current entered the basin with grace, swirling in slow spirals that brushed against the coral edges. The motion was subtle but constant, a gentle turning that shaped everything around it. The jellyfish followed the motion instinctively, aligning their drifting to the unseen pull. The friends followed too, letting the current carry them through the circular motion. Around and around they went, each loop slower than the one before, until it felt as if they were part of the current itself. There was no resistance, no separation, only flow. Above them, the sky of the ocean brightened with the rising moonlight. The silver glow deepened, casting long shadows across the coral. Every creature that moved seemed to shimmer in the faint radiance, their outlines softened by the liquid air around them. The sea had become a mirror for the heavens, the boundary between water and sky dissolving entirely. From far away, the low hum of the reef still echoed faintly. The vibration was carried by the current, a soundless sound that resonated through the water. It joined the rhythm of the tide, weaving itself into the steady pulse that guided the sea. Tiny lights began to appear within the current, motes of glowing plankton awakened by the movement of water. They drifted in clusters, rising and falling like embers in slow motion. Some attached themselves to jellyfish tendrils, while others hovered freely, blinking in and out of existence. Together, they formed a constellation that mirrored the night sky above. The friends floated among them, surrounded by drifting lights that pulsed like gentle stars. The sensation of motion became abstract, not moving through water, but through time itself. Each breath of the ocean was timeless, each moment blending seamlessly into the next. The current began to thicken as it passed through the lower edge of the basin. The motion grew slightly stronger, though never harsh. It curled upward, pulling the jellyfish and the plankton in its wake, carrying everything toward the open sea beyond the fields. The friends followed, drawn along effortlessly. The meadows of seagrass gave way to smooth sands, and the faint hum of the reef faded behind them. Ahead, The vast plain of open ocean stretched endlessly. The light of the moon refracted into silvery bands across the sand. The current moved steadily now, creating long, ribbon-like trails that extended toward the horizon. The jellyfish drifted above these trails, glowing faintly against the dark backdrop of water. The trails intertwined, forming spirals and arcs, shapes that seemed random but felt deliberate. The silent handwriting of the sea. As they drifted, the temperature of the water shifted. The warmth of the field gave way to a cooler, calm, soothing, and deep. The transition was seamless, almost imperceptible. The sea's rhythm remained unchanged, patient, even, eternal. The friends floated through this vast expanse, carried by the same breath that had moved through the coral, through the meadows, through every hidden corner of Bikini Bottom's ocean. It was the same current that had shaped shells, carved coral, and carried the whispers of tides for generations. It was the memory of the sea itself, alive and unending. Above, a small school of glowing fish appeared, their bodies illuminated with streaks of gold and green. They swam in synchronized patterns, turning as one, their movements tracing invisible designs in the water. They did not flee or rush. They simply existed within the flow, part of the same quiet rhythm. The current thickened once more, circling around a cluster of coral pillars that rose from the seafloor like ancient monuments. The coral glimmered with faint bioluminescence, echoing the soft pulse of the jellyfish above. Between the pillars, sand had gathered into delicate dunes, shaped by countless tides. The water here was utterly still, though the current flowed gently around its edges, an island of peace within motion. The friends came to rest upon the smooth sand, watching the play of light ripple across the coral walls. The glow of the jellyfish reached them in faint, rhythmic flashes. Time felt suspended. The ocean breathed around them, calm and endless. The current moved on, continuing its journey toward deeper waters, leaving behind only soft ripples that faded quickly into stillness. The friends remained where they were, weightless and silent, resting within the ocean's gentle heartbeat. Far above, the jellyfish began to spread across the dark sea like drifting clouds. Their lights grew dimmer, softer, blending with the faint shimmer of the moon's reflection. The reef's hum was a memory now, distant but constant. The night had reached its deepest quiet, and in that stillness, the ocean seemed to hold its breath. A pause before dawn, a space between tides, a moment of pure, unbroken peace. The sea dreamed on, and the friends drifted within it, part of that dream, carried not by current or motion, but by the eternal calm that lived in the heart of the water. Before the light returned, the ocean waited. There was no sound in that stillness, no movement beyond the slow, imperceptible rise and fall of the tide. The sea rested in its deepest calm, suspended between darkness and day. The jellyfish had drifted high into the quiet water, their faint glow fading with the night. The meadows below lay wrapped in shadow, each blade of seagrass standing motionless, bathed in the last breath of the moonlight. For a moment, time seemed not to exist. The world beneath the waves was infinite and motionless, as though it were the sea itself that slept, dreaming of all that lived within it. Then, from beyond the horizon, the faintest hint of gold began to emerge. It was not yet light, more an awareness, a presence beneath the surface of the sky, the darkness thinned by degrees, the deep blue lightening to violet, then to the soft gray of morning. The water shifted subtly, carrying with it the first murmurs of change. The sea's heartbeat, the rhythm that had slowed through the night, began to quicken again, gently, naturally, as though awakening from a peaceful dream. The first rays of sunlight pierced the upper ocean, refracted and scattered into countless beams that danced downward through the layers of water. Each beam shimmered faintly, twisting and splitting as it passed through the drifting plankton. The light touched the jellyfish first, igniting their translucent bodies with soft iridescence. Then it reached the coral, bringing color back to the world, pale pinks, soft blues, and the faint shimmer of gold returning to the reef's surface. The water around Jellyfish Fields brightened gradually. Shadows retreated into their crevices, replaced by light that moved like breath through the open expanse. The meadows swayed again, blades of seagrass bending gently under the renewed current. Bubbles rose from the sand, their slow ascent reflecting the morning light like tiny beads of glass. The friends drifted through the awakening field, carried effortlessly by the tide. The calm that had settled over the sea during the night lingered still, softened now by the warmth of dawn. The current was light, playful, curious, moving not with the patience of sleep, but with the quiet anticipation of a new day beginning. Far above, the jellyfish began their slow descent from the upper sea. Their bodies glowed once more, this time with the faint reflection of sunlight rather than their own luminescence. They drifted through the shafts of light that pierced the water, each movement leaving ripples of gold and blue in their wake. The field below responded in kind, crabs stirring from the sand, small fish emerging from coral shelters, clouds of plankton rising in shimmering waves. The world was alive again, yet remained utterly tranquil. There was no noise, no rush. Even in motion, everything moved with the same fluid grace, each creature following the rhythm of the sea's gentle pulse. At the edge of the field, the reef glowed anew. Its coral surfaces caught the morning light and scattered it in every direction, casting soft reflections across the water. The deep hum that had sounded through the night softened now into a gentler vibration, less of a song, more of a whisper. The reef was awake, stretching quietly beneath the tide. The current carried faint traces of warmth from the surface. It flowed between coral pillars, along the valleys of sand, and through the meadows where the friends floated. Every grain, every blade of seagrass, caught a glint of morning and held it like a secret. The entire ocean shimmered in layers of silver and blue, a tapestry of motion and reflection that had no beginning and no end. A small school of fish appeared from the east, their scales flashing gold where the light touched them. They moved together in perfect unity, weaving patterns through the water like dancers tracing invisible trails. Their motion stirred the sand below, sending soft spirals, drifting upward. The spirals caught in the current, swirling into the paths of jellyfish as they passed. From far away, the faint echo of waves breaking above reached through the water, a distant sound, deep and rhythmic. It was the heartbeat of the surface world, where sunlight sparkled and the air shimmered. Though the friends remained below, the sound was comforting, familiar, a reminder that all worlds were connected, each breath of the ocean reaching both sky and sand. The meadows swayed more freely now. The seagrass had turned from silver to green, moving in slow waves that mirrored the rhythm of the tide. Tiny bubbles clung to the blades, glistening with refracted light. Small creatures moved among them, translucent snails, shrimp, and tiny fish with fins that shimmered like crystal. The ocean floor was alive with subtle motion, a quiet celebration of morning. The light deepened as the sun rose higher. The beams thickened and brightened, reaching deeper into the field. The colors of the coral grew more vivid, crimson, orange, violet, all glowing beneath the clear water. The jellyfish pulsed slowly, their bodies reflecting hues they did not possess, like living mirrors of the sea itself. The friends glided between them, carried by the same gentle current that had moved through the night. There was a rhythm here, not of time as it was measured above the waves, but of tides and breath and light. Each motion was both beginning and continuation, part of the endless cycle of the ocean's quiet life. As the day settled fully into the sea, the calm of night gave way to a deeper peace, not the silence of stillness, but the serenity of movement understood. The creatures of the reef moved in harmony, each act deliberate, each breath synchronized with the greater pulse of the water. The sea itself seemed to hum softly with contentment, as though it, too, were grateful for another dawn. High above, the surface of the water shimmered like liquid glass. The sunlight danced across it, bending into endless patterns. Every few moments, a bubble would rise from below and break upon the surface, sending small rings outward that rippled across the reflected sky. Each ring expanded, faded, and vanished, a brief, perfect echo of the ocean's eternal rhythm. The jellyfish began to drift toward the open sea once more, following the current that led beyond the meadows. Their slow ascent caught the light, trailing threads of gold behind them that faded into the water like dissolving memory. They were part of the tide, moving always with it, unhurried, unbound. The friends watched as the field brightened around them. Every coral, every grain of sand, every blade of grass shimmered with light. The hum of the reef blended with the murmur of the current, and for a moment the sea seemed to sing, not in words, but in tone and presence, a language older than sound, older than time. The song was one of peace, of endless continuity. It was the sound of the world breathing. The day continued to unfold, calm and golden. The ocean had awakened fully now, yet its energy remained soft, expansive but gentle, alive yet untroubled. There was no hurry in its motion, no rush to reach anywhere. The journey was itself the purpose, the motion itself the rest. The friends drifted with the tide, bathed in the warmth of the morning. The sea moved around them like a living dream, slow, kind, eternal. Far above, the last trace of moonlight faded from the surface, replaced entirely by sunlight that rippled through the open water. The night currents had completed their cycle, giving way to the bright calm of day. The ocean was awake once more, breathing deeply beneath the waves. And as the light deepened, the sea, vast and gentle, seemed to whisper one final thought to all who moved within it, that even in stillness, life continued, that even in motion, peace endured, that every dawn beneath the waves was not an ending, but the sea, remembering how to dream again. Morning deepened across Jellyfish Fields, bringing with it a soft brilliance that filled every corner of the sea. The golden light of the sun filtered gently through the water, scattering into ribbons that swayed with the current. These ribbons descended like threads of silk, weaving through the meadows, across the coral, and down into the tranquil valleys where the sea still dreamed. The entire ocean seemed illuminated from within, a vast cathedral of moving light, alive with the slow rhythm of daybreak. The reef, which through the night had hummed with a patient, low vibration, began now to change its tone. The deeper hum grew lighter, more melodic, as if the coral itself were awakening. Each living structure of the reef, the branching fans, the rounded pillars, the delicate lattices, began to vibrate subtly with the movement of the water. The sound was not something heard, but something felt, a resonance that filled the ocean's stillness with quiet harmony. It began as a murmur in the lower reaches of the reef, a faint echo traveling through the coral. Then, as the sunlight touched more of its surface, the resonance expanded. Each colony responded to the warmth, sending soft vibrations through the skeletons of calcium and stone. The water carried the sound outward, transforming the entire reef into one great instrument, the coral chorus. The music was not like a melody made by hands or instruments. It had no rhythm that could be counted, no beginning, no end. It was born of current and temperature, of light and life moving together. Each coral species sang in its own frequency, some deep and slow, others high and shimmering. Together they formed layers of tone that wove through the sea, blending into a single, endless chord of living sound. The friends drifted through the water as the choral chorus rose around them. The sensation was like being inside the heart of the ocean itself. The vibrations touched everything, the sand beneath them, the blades of seagrass swaying above, even the shells lying half buried on the ocean floor. Every part of the sea became an instrument, every motion part of the song. The jellyfish, scattered through the field, pulsed in rhythm with the sound. Each gentle contraction of their bodies seemed to echo the coral's vibrations. As they moved, their translucent forms caught the light and sent it spinning outward in rings that shimmered through the current. It was as if light itself had joined the song. Fish began to emerge from their shelters in the reef, drawn by the resonance. Small silver schools glided between coral towers, their scales flashing in the sunlight. Larger shadows moved more slowly, the graceful arcs of manta rays passing through beams of light, their wings stirring the water in silent rhythm. Every creature seemed to understand the song without needing to hear it. It was the natural pulse of their world. The choral chorus grew stronger as the tide shifted. The current began to flow through the reef in gentle waves, each one amplifying the sound as it passed. The vibrations rippled across the ocean floor, climbing up coral spires, traveling through the water like invisible threads. The seagrass bowed in time with the movement, its motion a soft counterpoint to the coral's steady hum. And above it all, the sunlight continued to drift downward, painting everything it touched with warmth. The colors of the reef deepened, vivid oranges, radiant purples, the pale blues of staghorn coral, all glowing softly in the filtered light. The coral polyps themselves extended, opening like tiny flowers to catch the energy of the morning. Their delicate tentacles moved in slow unison, reaching, swaying, shimmering. They were the singers of the reef, countless and unseen, their collective voice sustaining the chorus that filled the sea. The sound seemed to travel beyond Jellyfish Fields, across valleys of sand and over distant ridges. It reached into the open water where the currents turned and where the deeper world began. There, in the darker blue, the sound transformed, its clarity fading into low vibrations that could be felt rather than heard. Yet even in those distant depths, the memory of the reef's song remained. The ocean was vast, but its heart was connected. The friends moved with the current, passing through fields of coral that shimmered with life. Everywhere, the sound pulsed gently through the water, shaping it, coloring it. Tiny bubbles rose from the coral surfaces, catching sunlight and scattering it into fragments. Each bubble carried with it a faint trace of the song, a soft echo of the reef's living voice, before it drifted upward and vanished into the layers above. As the morning wore on, the chorus reached its fullest expression. The reef glowed from within, the coral shining faintly even in the growing light. The jellyfish formed slow spirals above, their glowing bodies moving in delicate synchronization. The currents, drawn by the temperature and motion, began to swirl in graceful patterns that followed the rhythm of the song. It was as though the entire sea, water, light, and life had come together to breathe as one. The harmony resonated not only through space, but through time. The song was ancient, as old as the sea itself. Each choral generation carried within it the vibrations of those that came before, the silent inheritance of centuries of tides. The reef song was not just sound, it was memory. The sea was remembering every dawn it had ever known. The friends drifted into the center of the coral valley, where the song was strongest. Here, the coral grew in great arches and spirals, enclosing open spaces filled with light. The water shimmered with reflection, the boundaries between coral and current dissolving. The light and sound became inseparable, the glow of the reef pulsing with the rhythm of its voice. They floated within that vast harmony, weightless and still. The coral's resonance surrounded them, gentle but complete, like being held by the sea itself. The sensation was not of listening, but of becoming part of the sound, a vibration carried through every fiber of being. The ocean was alive, and through it, so was everything within it. For a long while, time dissolved completely. The sunlight above shifted slowly, but it no longer mattered. The sea had reached a state of perfect equilibrium, a balance of motion, light, and sound. The coral continued its song, neither rising nor falling, steady as breath, endless as the tide. Gradually, the current began to change again. The light grew warmer, the sound softer. The coral polyps started to close, retreating into their protective shells as the midday calm approached. The chorus faded from a resonant hum to a whisper, then to a faint vibration that lingered just beyond hearing. The sea quieted once more, not in silence, but in rest. The coral slept again, its song absorbed into the cell. Memory of the water. The jellyfish drifted higher, their luminous forms turning pale in the growing light. The meadows waved gently, each motion slow and deliberate. What remained was peace, pure and unbroken. The reef had sung its morning song, and now the sea carried its echo, passing it through every current, every ripple, every pulse of water that moved through Jellyfish Fields. The world beneath the waves glowed softly in the golden calm of day. No beginning, no end. Only the steady rhythm of the ocean, eternal and kind. By the time the coral's morning chorus faded, the sea had entered its slowest rhythm. The sun was high now, though its light reached the depths only as a softened gold, fractured and muted by the gentle motion of the water. The world beneath the waves shimmered faintly, alive but quiet, a great ocean breathing in long, measured intervals. The surface above had grown still, its ripples reduced to thin, moving lines that traced the boundary between water and sky. Each reflected beam descended in soft curves, bending as it entered the sea, painting the coral and sand below in shapes that flickered and vanished with the shifting tide. Jellyfish Fields stretched endlessly below that moving light. The meadows were vast, rolling expanses of seagrass and coral ridges that spread outward until they met the darker blue of the deep. From above, the field looked like an endless fabric of green and gold, swaying in invisible wind. The current that had once carried the morning song now moved, slowly, its strength spent, its energy transformed into stillness. The ocean had entered its quiet hour, the time when the water grows heavy with warmth and even the smallest sounds become subdued. The movements of creatures, though constant, were nearly silent. Fish glided between shadows without disturbing the sand. Crabs scuttled along the reef, their paths leaving faint lines that disappeared as quickly as they appeared. Even the jellyfish had slowed their drifting, their bodies pulsing only once or twice in the span of a long moment. The friends floated near the center of the field, suspended in the clear water. The sea felt different now, not asleep, but listening. Every sound was a whisper, every movement a thought. The hush was not emptiness, it was fullness. It was the ocean gathering itself, holding its breath between one tide and the next. Above them, beams of sunlight continued their descent, slow and deliberate. Each one traced a path through the drifting particles of the sea, catching the edges of the jellyfish and turning them to gold. The rays scattered across the meadows, illuminating patches of coral and sand like tiny suns burning beneath the surface. Far away, the reef shimmered faintly with reflected light. The polyps had retreated after their morning bloom, leaving the coral calm and still. Yet even in rest, it remained alive, its faint vibrations continuing deep within the stone, like the low hum of a thought too soft to hear. The tide shifted ever so slightly. A breeze far above brushed the surface, its movement carried downward through the water in invisible ripples. The current stirred the fields again, but gently, as if careful not to disturb the silence. The blades of seagrass swayed in unison, the motion slow and hypnotic. The light caught their tips, creating 1,000 bright points that shimmered like stars in motion. The friends drifted with the tide. They moved without purpose, letting the sea decide their direction. Each movement felt infinite, the distance between one moment and the next, stretched by the vast calm around them. The world had expanded, not outward, but inward, filling every breath with space and quiet. In this stillness, the colors of the ocean grew softer. The greens of the meadow turned to pale jade. The gold of the sand deepened into amber. Even the blue of the water shifted, fading into a soft translucence that made it hard to tell where the sea ended and the light began. It was as if the entire ocean had become one continuous surface, folding in upon itself, vast and tender. Tiny bubbles rose from the sand, forming columns that drifted lazily toward the surface. They caught the sunlight and split it into faint rainbows before disappearing into the brightness above. The water that surrounded them was almost motionless, so calm that even the faintest ripple could travel for great distances. At the far edge of the field, a cluster of coral arches stood like monuments, their surfaces carved smooth by centuries of current. Within their shadows, small fish rested, their movements slow, their colors muted. The coral glowed faintly beneath them, pulsing with soft internal light, the remnants of morning still lingering deep within the stone. The quiet horizon stretched endlessly beyond those arches. There, the water grew darker, fading into shades of blue so deep they seemed to contain the memory of night. It was not a boundary, but an invitation, the sea calling outward into the vastness that lay beyond the fields. The friends gazed toward that distance, where the horizon blurred into light, and felt the calm of the ocean move through them like a breath. The current changed again, ever so slightly. It no longer moved horizontally, but upward, carrying warmth from the lower sea to the surface. The movement was gentle but persistent, lifting particles of sand and fragments of shell. These fragments shimmered in the light, creating a soft haze that hung above the meadows like golden dust. The haze thickened as it rose, then thinned again as the particles settled. The process repeated endlessly. Rise, drift, fall. The ocean's silent heartbeat rendered visible. Every living thing in the field responded to this rhythm. The coral expanded and contracted imperceptibly. The seagrass waved in soft patterns. Even the smallest plankton shifted in the same direction, each microscopic life following the same invisible pulse. The sea had become a single organism, its parts moving together in harmony beyond intention or awareness. Above, the sunlight grew warmer. It filtered through the surface like honey, deepening the golden tones of the sand and coral. The light was constant now, not shifting or pulsing, but steady, radiant. The ocean seemed to glow with its own light, the boundary between water and sun erased. The reef's hum returned faintly, a low, sustained vibration that trembled through the water. It was softer than before, distant but familiar, the memory of the morning chorus echoing through the calm. The sound reminded the sea of its continuity, of its endless motion from day to night and back again. The friends drifted closer to the coral arches, passing through the slow columns of bubbles rising from the sand. The light bent through the bubbles, scattering across their forms in waves of color. For a brief moment, the world seemed painted in glass and fire, a spectrum suspended in stillness. Then, as the current shifted again, the colors dissolved, and all returned to gold. They came to rest near the largest arch, where the coral rose high above the sea floor. The surface was smooth to the touch, worn by ages of tide. Tiny barnacles clung to its lower curves, opening and closing slowly as the current passed. Within its hollow center, the water shimmered faintly, catching the reflections from the sunlit meadows beyond. The friends remained there for a long while, weightless within the calm. No thought, no sound, no sense of beginning or end, only the ocean's breathing. The quiet horizon stretched outward, its calm unbroken, its silence alive with unseen motion. In the stillness, even the smallest details seemed infinite. The way the sand shifted beneath the tide, the faint vibration of the coral beneath the current, the way the light bent and returned, again and again, never quite the same. The sea was eternal in that moment, not because it lasted forever, but because it needed no time at all. Eventually, the current began to move again, this time deeper and slower. It flowed from the open horizon, carrying with it the first cool breath of the coming evening. The sunlight dimmed slightly, turning from gold to amber. Shadows began to lengthen across the coral ridges, the edges of the meadows darkening into blue. The quiet remained, but it was changing. It was no longer the stillness of midday, but the calm that precedes transformation, the ocean preparing itself to shift once more, from brightness into dream. The friends felt the change without needing to see it. The water thickened slightly, the warmth retreating layer by layer as the deeper currents stirred. The reef's hum grew fainter, merging into the sound of distant water moving through the trenches beyond. The horizon, once bright and endless, began to fade into deeper color. The edge between sea and light softened until it disappeared entirely. What remained was a world without direction, without gravity, without distinction between surface and depth. Only the pulse of the ocean remained, steady, patient, infinite. The sea inhaled, the sea exhaled, and in that breath, the world continued, unbroken, unhurried, eternal. The quiet of midday had begun to soften. It started with the faintest tremor in the water, a subtle shift in temperature, the slow arrival of cooler currents from the deeper blue. The sunlight, once steady and warm, began to change its tone. Gold became amber, and amber deepened toward rose. The ocean was turning once more, as it always did, from brightness toward stillness, from motion toward rest. Jellyfish Fields responded like a vast organism. The meadows of seagrass bent in unison as the tide changed direction, the blades whispering against one another in a rhythm that could almost be mistaken for breath. The coral arches shimmered faintly as the light touched their edges, their colors growing richer in the waning glow. The sea seemed to exhale, letting the warmth of the long afternoon drift away. The sky above the surface was unseen from below, but its change could be felt. The water grew denser with shadow. The beams that had once been golden now fell as long ribbons of muted color, purple and blue, fading gently as they reached the sand. Tiny motes drifted through those ribbons like stars scattered through deep space, each one turning in the slow current, glinting for a moment before disappearing again into the calm. The jellyfish began to gather as they always did, when day leaned toward evening. They came from every corner of the field, drawn together by the unseen call of the changing light. Their movements were slow and patient, each pulse of their translucent bells echoing through the quiet water like a heartbeat in the sea. Their bodies glowed faintly, not with brightness, but with the soft phosphorescence of living light, the kind that seems to belong more to dreams than to the waking world. As they gathered, the water began to glow with their presence. Dozens became hundreds, hundreds became thousands. The fields transformed into a drifting constellation, a sky beneath the sea. The light they cast was not uniform, but layered, pale white near the surface, soft violet deeper down. The glow pulsed in waves as they moved, each motion sending ripples of color outward until the entire field seemed alive with silent rhythm. The friends drifted among them, weightless, surrounded by the sea's soft light. The sensation was unlike anything else in the ocean, a quiet so deep it felt endless, yet filled with the pulse of life. The water itself seemed to listen as the jellyfish floated through, each movement as precise as it was unhurried. It was not flight, nor swimming, but something gentler, a surrender to the rhythm of the sea. The coral hummed faintly again, its tones lower now, slower. The sound merged with the motion of the water, creating a harmony that belonged not to day or night, but to the threshold between them. The ocean was neither awake nor asleep. It was suspended in perfect balance. The shadows of the coral stretched long across the seafloor, each ridge, each hollow filled with amber and violet light. The sand shimmered faintly, reflecting the glow from the drifting jellyfish. Tiny creatures emerged from their shelters, plankton, shrimp, and delicate larvae, forming invisible clouds that caught the light as they moved. The water grew denser, thicker with life and silence. The horizon began to darken. Far off, the deeper sea had already turned to indigo, the last traces of sunlight slipping away into unseen depths. The currents there were cooler, and as they rose, they mingled with the warmth of the upper water, creating soft waves of temperature that rippled through the fields. The motion was invisible but could be felt, a long, slow undulation, steady as the breathing of the earth. The seagrass responded once again, bending toward the flow. Their tips glowed with faint luminescence, catching the light of the jellyfish and carrying it downward in soft lines. The meadows became a tapestry of moving glow, alive and fluid, a landscape that existed somewhere between the physical and the imagined. The ocean grew quieter still. Even the faint clicks and hums of distant creatures had faded. What remained was the rhythm of the current and the slow, steady pulse of the jellyfish. Their motion had become synchronized, not by sound or signal, but by some deeper order. An instinct carried through the water itself. The friends floated higher, rising slowly through the layers of light. The warmth of the upper sea touched them once more, before it began to fade. The surface shimmered faintly above, reflecting the glow from below. The two mirrors, sky and sea, folding into one another in perfect symmetry. The coral meadows stretched endlessly beneath them, their details fading into darkness as distance increased. The arches and ridges were now mere silhouettes, their colors absorbed by the encroaching night. Yet even in darkness, the sea was luminous, the light of the jellyfish and the plankton painting delicate constellations across the water. The current shifted once more, carrying the faint scent of the open ocean, that deep, ancient cold that lies beyond the continental shallows. It was the breath of the wider world, the reminder that all the oceans were connected. The water around Jellyfish Fields trembled faintly as it arrived, not in disturbance, but in greeting. It was then that the sea began its transformation. The last rays of light from above dissolved completely, replaced by the soft radiance of the life below. Day had become memory, and the ocean had turned inward. The rhythm of the currents slowed to near stillness. The seagrass ceased its movement. Even the sand settled. Only the jellyfish continued their slow ascent, their luminous bodies pulsing softly in the deepening blue. The stillness that followed was absolute, but not empty. It was filled with presence, the unseen infinite awareness of the ocean itself. The quiet was not silence, but a kind of listening, as though the sea were waiting for the next breath, creation. Time no longer moved forward, it expanded. Every second stretched into eternity. The drifting jellyfish, the glimmering coral, the faint hum of distant life, all merged into one continuous experience, seamless and eternal. The horizon disappeared completely, swallowed by the seamless blending of darkness and light. There was no boundary between near and far, no direction to follow. The sea had become a dream without edges. The friends floated within that dream. Still and unthinking, they were part of the same rhythm now. The slow, steady pulse that moved through every drop of water, every living thing, every shadow and shimmer beneath the waves. The ocean held them as it held everything else, cradling all in its boundless calm. And so the drift continued, slow, weightless, endless. The jellyfish rose. The coral dreamed. The sea breathed. Night was coming, but it was not a darkness to be feared. It was rest, the deep, eternal exhale of the ocean after a day of quiet, song. The horizon, though gone from sight, was still there, not as a line, but as a promise. The promise that the sea would continue its endless rhythm, that light would return, that the song would begin again. The water dimmed further. The glow of the jellyfish faded to pale silver. The last traces of day sank slowly into memory. And beneath it all, the ocean whispered its one unbroken truth, that everything drifts, and everything returns, and nothing in the sea is ever truly lost. Night had fully descended over Bikini Bottom's ocean. From the surface to the deepest valley, the light had surrendered completely, leaving behind only the faint, ethereal glow of the sea's living inhabitants. The transition was slow and seamless, as if the day had simply exhaled and, in doing so, turned itself inside out. Jellyfish Fields was now a realm of shadow and soft radiance. The meadows that had shimmered gold under the sun now pulsed gently with hues of violet and pale blue. Every movement, the drifting of a jellyfish, the ripple of current across coral, left behind trails of luminescence that lingered for moments before dissolving back into the dark. The ocean had become a sky, and the jellyfish were its stars. The water was cooler now. Each layer of the sea carried its own distinct breath. The upper water soft and mild, the lower depths heavy with the slow rhythm of ancient currents. The temperature shifted, like the inhale and exhale of some vast, unseen being. This motion was not wind, not wave, but the ocean's pulse, the breath of the deep. It began far below, in the darkness beyond the continental slope, where pressure was infinite and sound moved like thought. There, unseen currents turned in slow spirals, drawing the cold water of the abyss upward. The movement was imperceptible at first, a slow stirring that took hours to reach even a few meters higher. But it was steady, eternal, the heartbeat of the sea itself. As it rose, it gathered fragments of the world above, drifting particles of sand, the shadows of small creatures, the echoes of faraway tides. When the current finally reached the fields, it brushed softly against the seafloor, cool and heavy, stirring the stillness without disturbing it. The water that followed carried whispers of the deep, faint sounds too low for hearing, vibrations too vast for measurement. The coral sensed it immediately. Each living structure responded with a faint tremor, an almost inaudible hum that traveled through the stone and into the surrounding water. The hum deepened as the current moved through the reef, merging with the ocean's breath. The result was a resonance, a slow, vast chord that filled the sea without sound, a harmony that existed only through feeling. The jellyfish responded next. Their bodies glowed brighter for a moment as the deep current touched them, their pulsations synchronizing without intention. Each pulse matched the slow rhythm of the rising water, the great inhale and exhale of the deep. The fields moved as one body, thousands of translucent forms drifting upward in harmony, their light ebbing and flowing like the tides themselves. From a distance, the sight was almost cosmic. The fields were a galaxy turned inward, stars suspended in motion, each one beating with its own small energy, yet together forming a single, unified pattern. The coral below mirrored this movement, its faint phosphorescence expanding and contracting with the same rhythm. Even the sand seemed alive, vibrating faintly under the weight of invisible energy. The ocean was awake, though no creature stirred. This was not the wakefulness of life, but the awareness of existence itself, a consciousness too vast for thought, too slow for time. It filled every layer of the sea, from the smallest shell to the open abyss beyond sight. Every molecule of water carried its pulse. Every grain of sand shared its rhythm. The friends drifted near the edge of a coral ridge, surrounded by the glow of jellyfish. The current brushed past them like a whisper, soft and cool, carrying with it the scent of the deep, the mineral tang of pressure and distance, the essence of unseen worlds below. They floated motionless, and yet they were moving, carried gently along the invisible current. The coral ridge rose high behind them, its arches and towers fading into the dark above. Within its shadows, small creatures moved. Nocturnal fish, glowing plankton, the flickering outlines of shrimp. Their lights were brief, appearing and vanishing like thoughts. Each pulse of light was part of the same grand rhythm, the breath of the deep made visible. Farther away, the meadows swayed faintly. The seagrass bent toward the flow, each blade catching the jellyfish's glow. Together, they formed an oceanic tapestry of movement, soft waves within waves, rhythm upon rhythm. The current deepened, passing through the entire field in silent succession. The coral hummed lower, the light pulsed slower. The ocean's heartbeat grew stronger, In that endless moment, the sea seemed to exist outside of time. The usual boundaries between near and far, surface and depth, sound and silence, had dissolved completely. The world was unified by motion alone, by the breath that linked every particle of the ocean together. The deep current continued to rise, bringing with it the cool memory of places far below the reach of light. It carried the weight of old tides, the stories of sediment and stone, the quiet persistence of centuries of motion. Each cycle was a conversation between past and present, the abyss giving life to the shallows returning light to the depths. The jellyfish moved through it all, effortless, timeless. Their light dimmed and brightened in cycles too slow for conscious eyes. The rhythm was not perfect, but it was harmonious. Some pulsed slightly sooner, some slightly later, creating waves of light that rolled across the field like soft wind through grass. The ocean exhaled. The current slowed, its strength spent. The coral's hum softened into silence. The jellyfish drifted lower again, their movements growing smaller, more deliberate. The water warmed slightly, and the deep returned to its quiet. But even in rest, the memory of the rhythm remained. The coral still trembled faintly. The sand still vibrated with the echo of unseen depths. The ocean carried within it the after-image of its own breath, a resonance that would not fade completely until the next cycle began. The night continued without interruption. The surface far above reflected only darkness, yet the darkness was alive with shifting color. The jellyfish continued their ascent and descent. The coral continued its soft luminescence, and the sea continued to move with infinite patience. The ocean was neither still nor restless. It was something beyond both, the perfect balance between motion and stillness, between sound and silence. Its breath was the universe's oldest song, repeating endlessly, shaping every creature, every current, every grain of sand. And within that song, Jellyfish Fields slept. The coral dreamed in color. The jellyfish dreamed in light. The seagrass dreamed in motion. All of them were breathing the same slow breath, the same eternal rhythm that had existed since the beginning of water, and would continue long after the last ripple faded. The horizon was gone now, dissolved completely into the deep. There was no direction, no distance, no surface, only depth, endless and kind. The friends floated within it, as much a part of the ocean as the light, the current, or the silence. They drifted there for what could have been moments or centuries, suspended in the quiet eternity of the sea. The breath of the deep passed through them, steady and slow, uniting all things in one vast, patient stillness. And when it faded, it did not end. It simply transformed, the inhale becoming the exhale, the movement turning into calm, the sound dissolving into silence. The ocean rested, the light rested, the world beneath the waves continued to dream. The deep night had settled over the ocean with a weight that was neither heavy nor dark, but infinite. All sound had dissolved into the slow rhythm of the water, and all light had softened into the faint glow of life that drifted freely through the sea. Jellyfish Fields was suspended in that glow, a vast and silent expanse of living starlight, each pulse of movement tracing the ocean's breath. There was no horizon now, no surface or seafloor that could truly be distinguished. Everything had merged into one vast continuum of color and motion. The coral arches below no longer stood as boundaries, but as flowing shapes within the greater pattern. The meadows of seagrass, now still and silver, formed an endless carpet that rippled faintly with the passage of unseen currents. The world had entered its deepest calm. The luminous drift had begun, that sacred hour when all things in the ocean surrender their motion not to sleep, but to silence. It began with the light of the jellyfish. Their bodies, faintly glowing through the darkness, began to pulse in perfect rhythm once more. Each contraction sent out a ring of soft luminescence, expanding outward through the water in translucent waves. The rings overlapped and intertwined, forming spirals of gentle radiance that drifted across the sea floor and vanished slowly into the deep. These pulses did not move quickly. They drifted with the same slowness as the turning of tides. The sea received them, absorbed them, and returned them, the light passing through every particle of water, as if the ocean itself were alive and breathing in color. The coral joined next, its faint glow deepening. The hum that had filled the reef throughout the day now existed only as vibration, an energy without sound that reached outward from the stone itself. It spread into the surrounding sea like a quiet exhalation, merging with the jellyfish light until both became one seamless current. The fields were no longer simply alive. They were aware. Every part of them moved in understanding, united by rhythm and intention, older than memory. The seagrass bowed in unison with the current. The jellyfish drifted upward in slow arcs, and the coral shone faintly in answer to their light. The entire ocean had become a single organism, endless, illuminated, serene. Above, the surface was invisible. It existed only as the faintest shimmer far in the distance, where the water met what could no longer be called the sky. The last fragments of moonlight filtered downward in threads that dissolved before touching the reef, fading into the soft glow of the jellyfish below. The ocean's color had changed again. The indigo of night had deepened into a translucent silver blue. Every movement, every shimmer of light reflected upon that hue, as though the sea itself were made of glass and air. The boundaries between living and non-living, between movement and stillness, no longer existed. The water had become the dream of itself. The friends drifted higher, caught in the luminous current. There was no need to move. The ocean carried them effortlessly. Their path was unmarked, their direction without meaning. All that remained was the sensation of being, the gentle embrace of the water, the pulse of distant coral, the glow that came from everywhere and nowhere. Below them, the meadows stretched outward like an infinite sea within the sea. The jellyfish floated over them like drifting lanterns, their light painting the sand and coral in faint reflections that shimmered and disappeared. The grass below seemed to respond in kind, sending faint ripples through the sediment, small movements that mirrored the rhythm of the glowing creatures above. The coral, though still, seemed almost to breathe. From its porous surface, tiny streams of bubbles rose in long, winding lines. They twisted and merged, spiraling toward the surface before vanishing into the dark. The sound they made, soft, delicate, eternal, was the ocean's version of silence. Movement so constant it became stillness itself. The deeper currents had gone quiet, the breath of the deep, that ancient pulse that had filled the fields only hours before, now rested. In its place, the sea held a steady, endless calm. The water was perfectly balanced, not pushing, not pulling, not turning. Every droplet existed exactly where it needed to be. The luminous drift was the sea's meditation. In this state, everything paused, but nothing stopped. Every living thing within the water remained awake, but in quiet contemplation. It was the moment between one thought and the next, stretched into infinity. Light continued to drift upward from the coral and jellyfish, slow as smoke, delicate as breath. It gathered near the higher layers of water, then dispersed into the dark like mist fading into air. The movement was so gradual that it was difficult to tell if the light was rising or if the sea was simply expanding around it. Time dissolved completely. There was no before or after, no cycle to count, no change to anticipate. The sea had become a perfect moment, unending, unbroken, absolute. From within this stillness, faint sounds began to emerge, though none could be heard. They were not noises, but vibrations. The coral's deep resonance, the jellyfish's gentle contractions, the subtle shift of current through sand. Each movement carried energy, and together they formed a harmony too complete to notice. It was the song of the ocean's core, the soundless sound that had existed long before the first creature swam, before even the tides themselves had found their rhythm. It was creation remembering itself. The jellyfish, countless and glowing, began to drift upward again. Their ascent was slow and steady, each pulse sending soft ripples through the light. As they rose, their forms began to fade, not because the light dimmed, but because they became part of it. The distinction between jellyfish and glow, between being and reflection, vanished. The coral dimmed in response, its light receding into its stone heart. The reef returned to shadow, leaving only a faint outline visible against the dim expanse of the sea. The meadows fell still, the grass no longer swaying, as though even motion itself had been folded into the calm. The ocean had entered its purest silence. Nothing stirred, nothing shimmered, nothing spoke. Yet everything was alive with unseen rhythm. In that moment, the sea seemed to hold its breath, not in anticipation, but in peace. The luminous drift had reached its zenith, the moment when all of existence was in perfect equilibrium, neither beginning nor ending, simply being. The friends floated there, weightless and timeless, surrounded by the endless glow. Above them, the faintest glimmer of the surface waited, a pale shimmer that hinted at the world beyond the water. But it was distant, and it could wait. For now, the sea was enough. The coral dreamed. The jellyfish glowed. The water held them all in quiet grace. The ocean was light. The light was the ocean. And beneath the eternal calm, the world continued to breathe. The long night of the ocean began to fade, not with sudden brilliance, but with the gentlest return of light. It started far above, where the surface met the first whispers of morning. A faint silver hue began to stir there, a light too soft to see, too subtle to notice, the memory of day returning to a sea that had long been sleeping. For hours, the ocean had existed in silence. The luminous drift had filled every corner of Jellyfish Fields, every inch of coral and sand, with deep tranquility. The jellyfish had slowed their glowing dance. The coral had dimmed into shadow, and the meadows had fallen into stillness so profound it felt endless. Yet even in that stillness, the sea had never stopped breathing. It had simply been waiting. The deep exhale before the next inhale, the quiet before rebirth. Now, the inhale began. The light descended slowly, brushing against the upper layers of the sea. It moved like a sigh through water, spreading in ripples that shimmered faintly as they passed. Each ripple touched the drifting particles suspended in the current, turning them to motes of silver dust. The darkness did not vanish. It transformed, blending into pale color, as though the sea itself were waking from a long dream. The surface reflected the first touch of the sun. Its light refracted through the water, breaking into soft beams that spread in gentle fans through the depths. These beams did not rush or pierce. They unfolded. They caressed the upper currents, then the midwaters, then finally reached the coral far below. Each step of their descent was slow and reverent, like dawn learning how to be light again. The first jellyfish to feel the morning pulse stirred faintly. Their bodies, once dim, began to shimmer with renewed radiance. The glow was not as vivid as it had been under the night sky, but gentler, the kind of light that holds warmth within its softness. They drifted upward, turning slowly as they pulsed, their bodies tracing silver arcs through the deep blue. The meadows caught their reflection and glimmered faintly in return, as though answering a call older than time. The coral awoke next. Its surface, pale from hours of stillness, began to hum once more with the vibration of life. The hum deepened gradually, traveling through the reef's ancient skeleton into the hollow spaces between rock and water. From those spaces, faint plumes of bubbles rose, tiny messengers carrying the breath of the reef back into the sea. The coral's colors, muted during the night, began to return, faint pinks and oranges first, then deeper reds and golds, then the familiar living hues of the day. The ocean's pulse strengthened. The current shifted again, slow and sure, drawing warmth down from the surface and spreading it across the field. The motion stirred the sand, lifting fine grains into the water, where they shimmered like liquid sunlight. The meadows, touched by the flow, began to move once more. Their blades swayed in unison, bowing gently to the rhythm of the returning tide. Everywhere, the ocean was waking. The soft glow of the jellyfish grew stronger as they drifted higher, their bodies turning from silver to pale gold under the influence of the deepening light. The coral's hum rose in frequency, harmonizing with the movement of the current. Even the soundless vibration that filled the water during the night began to shift in tone, from the low resonance of sleep to the brighter pulse of awakening. The breath of the deep returned again, lighter now, warmer. It rose from below as it had in the night, but this time its coolness met the heat of the newborn sun. The two currents merged, their meeting forming delicate spirals that twisted lazily through the sea. Within those spirals, the light fractured, scattering into rainbows that danced across the coral and sand. The sea had turned itself into color once more, and still, the transition remained silent. No creature disturbed it with haste or noise. Every motion, every shimmer, unfolded at the same deliberate pace, as though the sea had promised never to rush its own becoming. The dawn beneath the waves was not an arrival, it was a remembering. The friends drifted together, caught in the center of the luminous transformation. The water around them glowed with the slow awakening of day. Everywhere they looked, the sea was alive, but peaceful. The coral breathing softly, the jellyfish pulsing in gentle ascent, the meadows swaying like the fabric of the world itself. The horizon began to return. It appeared first as a gradient of light, a boundary not seen, but felt. The endless blue of night lifted gradually, revealing the faint shimmer of the surface above. The water there glowed with reflected gold, and the line between ocean and sky began to reform, delicate and perfect. The ocean was inhaling deeply now. The coral's hum steadied into rhythm. The sand settled into place. The meadows moved with purpose again. Every living thing had found its place within the pulse of morning. The luminous drift was over, but its peace remained, woven into every breath of water, every ray of light. Far in the distance, beyond the coral ridges, the sound of faint waves could be felt again, the surface stirring with the first breezes of day. Those ripples would reach the field soon, dancing across the light and reminding the ocean of its endless motion. The jellyfish began to spread apart now, their great congregation dispersing across the fields. Their lights dimmed as the sunlight grew stronger, but they did not vanish. They simply became transparent again, blending with the sea until they were indistinguishable from the water itself. Their work was done. They had carried the night through to morning, their glow now part of the ocean's light. The coral released its last trails of bubbles, each one catching the morning rays as it rose. They burst softly at the surface, leaving no trace except the faintest ripple. A signature of life continued. The reef glowed now, with daylight alone, no longer self-illuminated but radiant nonetheless. The meadows swayed fully once more. The light filtering through the grass turned the seafloor into shifting mosaics, moving patterns of shadow and brightness that danced together in silence. The rhythm of the water had quickened, though only slightly, enough to remind the world that day had begun again. The ocean was awake. Yet, even in its awakening, the memory of the night remained. The peace of the luminous drift lingered in the currents, soft and invisible, like the echo of a lullaby still humming in the air after the last note has faded. The coral remembered it in its hum. The jellyfish carried it in their slow pulse. The sea itself held it within every drop, a quiet promise that stillness would return, as it always did, when light would once again surrender to shadow. For now, the ocean shimmered in the first true light of day. The fields stretched outward beneath the golden surface, infinite and serene. The breath of the deep continued, patient and unbroken. And somewhere, within that slow rhythm, the sea whispered its eternal truth, that every dawn is only another part of the same eternal sleep, and that every night is the beginning of another light. The current moved once more through Jellyfish Fields, calm and bright. The coral sang softly, the jellyfish drifted upward, and the day began.